Welcome black viewers. In today's video, we will update you about the current situation in Addis Ababa, Amhara and Tigray region. Firstly, we will talk about the resistance is spreading. Fano and TPLF are now fighting on the same side and the federal government is panicking. Second, we will update you about Amhara is slipping out of Abiy's control, town by town, road by road. We also have reports about that TPLF has entered Amhara region and the two former enemies are building a new front together. After that, we will talk about some reports that Abiy's military is cracking under pressure, fighting 3 wars at once and losing ground. Stay with us. The picture on the ground is very different from what Addis Ababa is telling the world. For years, Abiy Ahmed told the world that Ethiopia was on the path to peace and prosperity, that the wars were over, that the country was healing. The Amhara region is telling a completely different story. The Tigray region is telling a completely different story. And now for the first time, both of these stories are converging into one. The resistance is rising, and Addis Ababa is running out of answers. Let's start with the most significant development in Ethiopian politics in years one that Abiy Ahmed's government has tried to minimize and dismiss. Fano and the TPLF, two forces that fought on opposite sides during the 2020 Tigray war, are now moving toward the same battlefield, against the same enemy, against the federal government of Abiy Ahmed. This was always Abiy's worst nightmare, and it is now becoming reality. Fano, the Amhara nationalist militia, fought alongside Ethiopian federal forces against Tigray in 2020. They were used as a weapon against the Tigrayan people. Then, when the war was over and a peace deal was signed, Abiy turned on them. The federal government moved to disarm Fano, to eliminate them, to treat the people who had fought for Ethiopia as enemies of the state. That betrayal did not go unpunished. Fano refused to disarm. They went back to the mountains, reorganized, and came back stronger. And now they are looking at the TPLF not as a former enemy, but as a fellow victim of Abiy Ahmed's broken promises. Reports confirm that meetings have taken place between TPLF, Fano, Eritrean officials, and Oromo Liberation Army representatives to discuss military coordination. Different peoples, different regions, different histories, but one common enemy, a federal government that has used, betrayed, and bombed each of them. This is not just an alliance of convenience. This is the natural result of Abiy Ahmed's strategy of divide, use, and discard. Now let's talk about what is actually happening on the ground in Amhara, because the scale of Fano's operations is something the federal government does not want discussed. Since March 2026, Fano has intensified its offensives across northern Ethiopia's Amhara region, increasing its rate of attacks by over 50% compared to previous months. Central Amhara, southern Amhara, key highways, strategic towns. The town of Debre Tabor, sitting on the B22 highway that connects eastern and western Amhara, has been contested by Fano forces. Think about what that means. Not a remote village, a highway town, a choke point on the main road connecting entire sections of the Amhara region. Fano forces are threatening population centers along the B22 and B31 roads, the arteries leading directly to Bahidar, the Amhara regional capital. The federal military has launched a counter-offensive. They have reinforced their presence in Amhara. They have the jets, the drones, the heavy weapons. And still Fano has not retreated. Why? Because Fano is not fighting a conventional war. They are fighting a people's war. They have roots in the communities. They have the support of a population that has watched federal forces bomb their towns, kill their civilians, and impose telecoms blackouts to hide the evidence. Speaking of which communications, blackouts have been recorded in more than 24 administrative areas across Amhara in a single week. When a government cuts communications to its own citizens, it is not fighting a war. It is hiding a war. Here is the development that changes everything. TPLF forces, the Tigray Defense Forces, have now entered the Amhara region, directly engaging Ethiopian federal and security forces in the Rayabala area of North Wulo Zone, which sits on the Tigray-Amhara border. This is not a small patrol. This is a deliberate strategic move. The TPLF is saying Tigray's war is not contained to Tigray anymore. If the federal government wants to open France, then the resistance will open France too. And the TPLF has every reason to be angry. The Pretoria Agreement signed in 2022 promised the withdrawal of Amhara militias from western Tigray. It promised displaced Tigrayans would return to their homes. It promised transitional justice. 3 years later, Amhara militias still occupy western Tigray. Displaced families are still in camps. And instead of justice, the federal government has been cutting Tigray's budget and imposing fuel blockades since late 2025. When a government starves a region of fuel and money, that is not peacekeeping. That is economic warfare. The TPF's answer to economic warfare is military expansion. And now they are in Amhara, on the same ground where Fano is fighting. The coordination, even if informal, is already happening. Now let's look at the federal government's position, because Abiy Ahmed's military is in a situation it cannot easily escape. The Ethiopian National Defense Force is fighting on 3 fronts simultaneously. In Tigray, where the TPLF reinstated its pre-war government in May 2026, declared the Pretoria Agreement dead, and is maintaining armed forces that the federal government calls illegal. In Amhara, where Fano has sustained a year-long insurgency that has now intensified, capturing towns and threatening the regional capital. In Oromia, where a separate armed conflict against Oromo resistance groups continues. 3 wars, 3 regions, 1 army. The federal government has been forced to redeploy forces from Amhara and Oromia toward Tigray, which means weakening one front to hold another. This is a military planner's nightmare. And the federal government's public statement that they will take strong action against anyone threatening Ethiopia's sovereignty is not a sign of strength. It is a sign of desperation. When a government needs to issue warnings to multiple armed groups across multiple regions, it means those armed groups are not afraid. Fano is not afraid. TPF is not afraid. They have already paid the highest possible price in blood, in displacement, in destroyed cities. You cannot threaten people who have lost everything. Finally, a word on Sudan. Because what is happening in Sudan is directly connected to what is happening in Ethiopia. The Sudanese armed forces have announced continued operations in the Blue Nile region, claiming captures of Makja and Sokom against opposition groups. Meanwhile, Ethiopia's federal government has been accused of allowing RSF, the paramilitary, fighting against Sudan's official army, to use Ethiopian territory, supplying them, hosting them, effectively backing one side of Sudan's civil war. Why? Because Sudan has been providing some level of support and space to TPLF, and Addis Ababa is trying to cut off that lifeline by backing Sudan's RSF. This means Ethiopia is now fighting wars inside its own borders and simultaneously pulling strings in a neighboring country's civil war. This is what regional destabilization looks like. This is what happens when a government, instead of making peace with its own people, tries to export instability to distract from its failures at home. The Amhara people through Fano are fighting for their survival, for their land, for the dignity that Abiy Ahmed's government stripped from them the moment they were no longer useful. The Tigrayan people through the TPLF and TDF are fighting for their right to exist, for the implementation of promises that were made and then broken, for hundreds of thousands of their people who died in a war Addis Ababa started. These two peoples who were once set against each other by the same government are now recognizing who their real enemy is. Their resistance is no longer regional. It is national. It is growing. And it cannot be bombed into silence. We will keep reporting the truth as it happens. Like, share, and subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss an update from the ground.